Hello, my name is Ali Shriko, and I'm going to be demonstrating to you a literacy-based lesson plan and how I could effectively use an assessment tool in order to track and monitor students' understanding and understanding of content and how they're learning throughout the lesson. So I'm going to share my screen. So to start off my lesson, before even diving into the story I planned, I'm going to show some vocabulary cards. So the topic I picked for my kindergarten class, it's a general ed classroom, and I'm assuming there will be some ESL learners as well thrown into the classroom. So I'm going to be showing vocabulary cards. So for example, this vocabulary card right here, it's going to have a picture of rules. Again, rules could be defined in many different ways depending on the content. So, for example, in this first picture, rules, it's leads or makes a decision. So, my topic for this week's lesson is kings and queens and how they rule kingdoms. And we're going to focus on vocabulary within kings and queens. So, for students to understand what rule means is very important for them to know it before we start diving into the story because they're going to be hearing that a lot throughout the topic and throughout this whole week's lesson. So rules, it leads and makes decisions. So I could say to my class, I'm the ruler of this classroom. I make the rules, I make the decisions for all you students. And here's a referee, and this he makes rules to play a game. So he makes directions for how to do something. So for example, I could put this in students' terms. Okay, here's the rules to the game. We're going to play patty cake, or here's the rules on how to play with the sand. First, keep your hands to yourself. Second, use your own little area for sand and etc. So to accommodate these vocabulary cards per each throughout this vocabulary lesson, I'm going to translate it into the ESL language of the students I have in my classroom. So I didn't want to translate it right now, but if there's Spanish speakers or Arabic speakers or Mandarin speakers, whoever my audience will be in my general ed classroom of 25 kindergarten students, I would adopt this to the also as well as English. I would adopt it to the language that they speak as well. So that's how I would introduce vocabulary cards before even diving in to the book. And here's another one. So spoiled. So for example, one, spoiled means ruined. So if you eat your food and it's all rotten, it's spoiled, you can't eat it. It went bad. That's an example. Or spoiled, like, oh, you're spoiled, you have all these toys. Give your toys, share your toys to other kids who don't have them. You're so spoiled. So these are just some examples. And again, there would be some Spanish words or Mandarin words or etc. Whatever other languages I have with students in my classroom, I would totally adapt these vocabulary cards to them. These are some vocabulary cards to go with the book. So I got this book and the curriculum map through Engage New York because it goes hand in hand with Common Core, which New York State is currently using still before transitioning to the next gen standard, which I know are going to happen very soon for New York. So the book is called Kings and Queens. I didn't attach the whole book on here, but basically it's just a picture book. And they give the words to the teacher and she reads the words while showing the picture book. So I'm not going to get into too much into detail about the actual book, but after we go over the vocabulary for the book and the teacher reads, or I would read the book to the students with pictures, while we're reading the book, we're going to do an informal assessment, which I'll go into more detail about that after I just tell you about my lesson. So to keep track of the informal assessment, I have this class roster. I'm sorry. So I divided them up by tables. In kindergarten class, I've seen groups of tables by colors, divided by colors. So at the red table, Alyssa, there's Mark, there's Jacob, there's Allie, there's Michelle. And I just broke them up by tables. So throughout the informal assessment, while I'm reading the book, I'm going to be asking some who, what, where, and when questions. And I'm going to be walking around to document who got those questions right. and etc. So I'm going to explain what the informal assessment is, but this is how I'll be tracking the students' progress throughout the lesson. So I know in my head what I need to work on after if they don't understand, or what I need to stop and explain to during and throughout the lesson. So I know for each child what level they're kind of on. So I have an anchor chart. So I would print out 5 of these charts. So I would place them on all the tables. There's 5 tables. They would go in the middle of the table. And I would have each child have one Post-it note. So, they could pick their favorite color. Maybe the red table would have red Post-it notes and etc. So I would say, who's the king? Put the Post-it note on the picture of the king. And this is the exact picture of a king that's in the book that I just read them. So, all my students would put, okay, the red Post-it note or the blue Post-it note or the yellow Post-it note goes right on the king. And then I would say, who's the queen? And they'll put the Post-it note on the queen. So while this is happening, I will be walking around and I'll be using this documentation to monitor what they know and what they don't know throughout when we're reading the book. For what do kings and queens wear on their head? Do they wear like a pretty hat, a cowboy hat, or a crown? And this is, again, reinforcing vocabulary that I mentioned before. I didn't put crown up in the vocabulary cards, but there is a vocabulary card with crown that I would use. So we went over vocabulary before. They heard it in the book. So they could put the content with the book as well as a visual. And this is the exact crown that's used in the book. So again, I'm connecting the book pictures and seeing if they can apply the information that they just heard. So what do king and queens usually wear on their head? All of them would put the Post-it note on the crown. Or if they don't, again, I'll monitor it right there. Where do kings and queens live? Do they live in a house like you and me? Do they live in the school where we're at right now? Or do they live in a big castle? And again, all the pictures I'm taking from are from this King and Queen's book. So they would put their Post-it note, hopefully, on the big castle right here. And when does a prince and princess become a queen or a king? So I put the kings right here. So, unfortunately, it's when the current king passes away. So I have his picture right here. And that's when the prince becomes the king. That's something important for them to know of how someone becomes a king. Okay, so that's the informal assessment throughout the book that I'll be reading. And again, I'll monitor it right on this class roster sheet. Then after reading the whole book, after do the assessments, we're going to go right to independent work, which is right here. So I want my students to create a drawing with detail of where a king and queen live and what they wear. So it's kind of tying in the informal assessment right up here. They live in a castle. They wear, crowns. In the book, they wear robes, purple, all the royalty colors we're going to talk about in the book. And then they're going to draw it right in here. And then they're going to write what they drew and what kings and queens do. So again, tying back the vocabulary word, kings and queens rule the land and rule the people that live in that land. Or just as basically as kings and queens rule. That's really all I want from this lesson. That's all the Common Core standards ask for these students to answer what, when, who, what, where, and when questions based with kings and queens. So if it ties in any of these aspects and they write it down right over here, then they met those standards. So that's my lesson in summary. So now how are we going to connect this with the textbook reading? So in early childhood, classroom assessments are informal and performance-based, and this relies heavily on teacher observations, like I just did, walking around, checking, did the students on table yellow, did Mark not understand what means and what do they wear on their heads, etc. So observations and just monitoring of students is very common. And because of everyday decisions are not high stakes and easily corrected classroom assessments, it does not need to meet technical standards for reliability and validity. So I'm not going to give every single day a standardized criterion reference norms test for kindergarten 5-year-old students. That's just not going to happen. So it relies heavily on teacher observations and just documentation, like I just did in the informal assessment above that I spoke about before. So most types of assessments require that students understand directions. They have to know how to follow directions and know a particular vocabulary words, which we just went over before with the vocabulary cards. Or they also have to understand what the teacher is saying. So limited language skills can easily interfere with obtaining an accurate picture of students' competence. So accurate assessment of children who are learning 2 languages sets risk and concern. So that's why me providing pictures, visuals, you don't have to know the language, you could just know the pictures, as well as translating some of the words that they can understand throughout the lesson in the book. That would also be really helpful, which I mentioned before that I would do throughout this lesson. So in the textbook, it touched upon Vygotsky's concept of the zone of proximal development. So dynamic assessment analyzes a child's performance, not just in the terms of what a child can do independently, but what the child can do with assistance performed by the teacher. So if I was walking around independent, with the informal assessment like before, and I'm walking to the yellow table and I could just see that Jacob is, hesitant. Which one do I put it on? What is the king or queen wear on the child on his head, his or her head? I could be like, oh, what do you think they wear? Do you think they wear like a baseball cap like you do? And I could just guide the student to the answer, not just blatantly giving them the answer. So I would assist the student. So this is me doing zone of proximal development that Vygotsky, that's his approach that he came up with and was an advocate for. So that's that approach that I used in my lesson, as well as another approach that focuses on content is what the child should know and what the child should be able to do. So this is a key component for the core knowledge curriculum. So this approach was founded by Hurwitz Jr., and the Core Knowledge Foundation is a nonprofit organization that promotes greater excellence and fairness in education. So the premise of the core knowledge is that equal education opportunity can be granted for every child by identifying the knowledge that all children should acquire, because knowledge is key to reading. So this approach sets expectations that all content and language should be incorporated to prepare children for the next level of curriculum. So the core knowledge sequence specifies what to teach, not how to teach, which I love, and that's what I used with my lesson. It does not limit the teacher to a particular approach. It sets a wide range of strategies that includes teacher-directed, large and small, group experiences, as well as child's play and discovering learning. So in my informal assessment in my lesson that I explained earlier, it's set to take place in small groups. It's by each table, and that table has 5 students within them. Students will place a Post-it note on top of the picture of the word the teacher says. So so just like my informal assessment, what does the king wear on his head? The crown. So that's doing it in small group work. And then at the end, my sort of formal assessment, not like a standardized test, but like it beats an informal assessment, would be the worksheet, which they have to do independently. So it's group and then independent work that ties in with this core knowledge curriculum approach, as well as the also approach of the Reggio Emilia approach. And this approach was introduced in the United States. It has inspired teachers throughout the world that made major contributions to the knowledge base. And this approach mentions various languages that are used in different forms, which I loved because it's really flexible. You could do anything with this approach. So in the forms of languages, there's media, drawing, sculpting, writing, which I have in my formal assessment at the end when they draw a picture and they write what they drew and what kings and queens do, as well as pictures, videos, dancing, music, words, numbers, and the list goes on, that are used to promote and display children's understandings of the world. So by reading the books Kings and Queens and showing various photos and talking about where kings and queens have lived or live currently, this shows various photos, and this talks about, and this ties in with the Reggio approach. Teachers can assess children's learning by documenting a project or activity through note-taking, photography, audio taping, videotaping, and collecting samples of students' work. So I would collect that last sample where they draw and they write what they learned about today's lesson. That would be my sample of students' work that I would collect and keep with me. So I could show to anyone who asked me, and also for my knowledge and analysis of students' performance, I could always refer back to that sample of student work that I just collected for today's lesson. So through the child's verbal expression, writing, drawing, instruction, researchers and teachers are able to see what children understand and how they convey and put onto paper their knowledge of what they learned. And the last approach I used was the child-centered model of curriculum planning, which draws on content knowledge, conceptual organizers, knowledge of child development, and developmental and learning continua. So all 4 dimensions of the model that are in the textbook, they occur in and influenced by social cultural context. By using the anchor charts as a conceptual organizer, this helps students visually see the importance of topics that relate to this lesson. So by using this anchor chart, this helps students organize their thoughts and focus on each question. It also highlights the main points of today's lesson about kings and queens. So they could also use this chart in order to help them with their independent work. They could always refer back to it. So this actually organizes. This is kind of like their graphic organizer to help them brainstorm and plan what to write down here. Write what you drew and what kings and queens do. So I hope you enjoyed my lesson, and I hope I effectively explained the approaches found in the textbook that support my assessment tools and how I would document student progress and how it's all backed up by evidence-based research. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. My name is Ali Shrico, and I hope Zoom is okay because it just helped me. I don't have a printer here or really supplies to make anything, so I hope Zoom is okay to record this. Okay, thank you so much. Bye.